In this video, I'm going to teach you how to make an oven out of locally available materials, or at least materials which are locally available in Uganda. And it's one that's powered by firewood. You can see another video that I have that explains how to use it, but this is just going to be about building the oven. So to build an oven like this, the materials that you're going to need are bricks, if you want, bricks and cement, to build a base like this. Now, the oven doesn't need a base. You could build it directly on the ground, but no one really wants to be baking while crouching on the ground. So what you need is some sort of structure that will keep your oven off of the ground and allow you to cook at the level that you want. So for me, I used bricks and cement to put them together, and I also put some cement on the ground underneath those bricks because I've found that sometimes termites will get into the oven through the ground if you don't have some barrier of cement separating the oven from the ground. But if you prefer, you can use local materials like the clay soil mixture that we're using for building the oven. You could use that for building the base of the oven as well if you don't have cement. Then you need some sort of small stones that you can use to fill that base, just as a filler, not because there's anything particularly special about the stones, but just to fill it. Then after that, you get some glass bottles or glass containers that you can put inside as insulation, and I'll show you how we use that one. But if you don't have them, you can still use the insulation mixture that we're going to be building with. So if you have glass bottles, that's great. You can use them for insulation. If you don't, you can leave that one out. But then the things that you for sure need, you need some bricks to make an arch for the doorway of the oven, and then you need about 4 wheelbarrows worth of sand and 4 wheelbarrows worth of clay soil. In my case, I'm using soil from a termite mound, which has a lot of clay in it. And then you need a sack of wood shavings, and that will be for the insulation mixture that we're going to be making first. Then finally, you need some dry grass, which we're going to use for making the plastering mixture, which will go on the very outside of the oven, and we'll be doing that one last. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll make the insulation mixture first, and I'll show you how the oven has started out from the inside. In this document, you can see some of the diagrams of the items that you need to have for making the oven and the measurements of how to do that. So first, you can see the cement slab that I made for the floor of the oven, and it's about 2 inches tall with a diameter of 22.5 inches. Then you can also see the circle that I drew on the ground for making the base. So the circle is 46 inches in diameter, and then you place the bricks within that circle and then build it up to the height that you want. Then, as you will see from my oven, you fill the inside with small stones, because this part is just a table to raise the oven off of the ground. Then, after you have those stones, you can put old soda bottles or other glass bottles inside on top of the stones. This is looking down into the oven. And then you will fill this with one of the building mixtures. Then after you've done that, you put this cement slab on top. If you want, you can have some bricks overhanging the edge of the base, kind of to make like a table coming out of the opening of the oven. Then this is for making the door of the oven. You want it to be 12 inches wide and 10 inches tall. And so you use your bricks to make an arch and put stones in between them to make them be at the right angle. And you can have a stick or a ruler to measure out the height and width. Then in this picture, it shows the next step. You have your arch already, and then you build your sand mound on top, which I'll show you, and you want the height of it to be 16 inches tall. So I will cut a stick that's 16 inches tall and then build the sand around it until it reaches that height. And then this is kind of the final picture. Once your oven is done, you have the base, you have the shape of the oven, there's your arch of the door, and then when you are using it, you can put some bricks in front to block the entrance so that air goes in and smoke comes out as you're building the fire to heat it. Then these are some items that you can make for using the oven. I use an old slasher for cutting grass that is metal, so I can use it to scrape out the hot coals. And you see these things in the video that I have on how to use the oven. But then you can also make a stick with cotton fabric on the end of it, and you use that to sweep out the oven floor after you're done with the fire. Then optionally, if you are making bread and pizza directly on the floor of the oven, you can have this kind of a flat, thin scooper to scoop out your bread. So we're going to get started. We're going to make 3 different mixtures of building material. One of them is the insulation material, and that will just be the clay soil and wood shavings. And then a second one is the main oven material, and that one is a mixture of clay and sand. And then the final one is the outside part, which is like a plastering mixture, and that one is dry grass mixed with clay soil. So we'll start with the insulation material, because that one I'm going to put on the bottom underneath the oven. Okay, you can see how I've started out by filling the oven with the small stones. I might have gone a little bit overboard and put too many stones. We'll see once I get to putting the insulation in there, but if I need to, I can take some of them out. So then I soaked my clay soil overnight, and I'm hoping that the termites are dead and won't bite my feet while I'm mixing this together, but we'll see. And then I have my wood shavings. So I'm going to mix together this clay soil and the wood shavings with enough water that we have a very thin mixture of clay soil. You want it to be almost the consistency of yogurt, and then you mix in enough wood shavings to make a material that can be packed together and used to build. So let's start working on that one. Okay, you can see that I've got a pretty sloppy wet mixture here. So I'm going to start mixing in my wood shavings. Got a little helper here. So we'll add in the wood shavings and just mix this all together until we have a really good amount of wood shavings in here and can make it into a nice firm ball. And I'll show you once it's mixed together like that. As I mix this together with my feet, I'm able to lift up the tarp and pull the mixture over on itself so that I can get at the bottom part better. But now I think we've reached the point where it holds together well, and it's got enough wood shavings in it. It's mostly wood shavings with a coating of clay soil. So I'm going to start putting a thin layer on inside the base of the oven, and then I'll put the bottles in and pack it around them. I've been saving these bottles for years, and finally I'm putting them to use in the oven. If you only have like 5 or 10, that's fine. I just tried to pack as many as possible. And I'm going to pack this insulation mixture around them to make a smooth layer. And that's the next thing that I'm going to do, and I'll show you that. You can see that I filled in the space around the bottles using that mixture of clay soil and wood shavings. And I can even that out as we start building the oven. But the next thing is just to put the floor of the oven on top of this, and then build the arch for the door of the oven. There's the slab for the base of the oven. That will be the floor. And then the next step is to build the arch for the doorway. And the opening is supposed to be 12 inches wide and 10 inches tall. And so I've got some sticks that I cut to those lengths so that we can make sure that it's the right size and shape. This is the arch for the doorway, and the width of the opening is 1 foot, and then the height is 10 inches. We used some bricks to balance the arch, and then stones in between them to hold them in place. So the next thing will be to make the building mixture and stuff it in between those bricks to support them. And then we'll put the mound of sand on the floor. That will be the shape for making the oven. Okay, you can see how I used the building mixture of clay and sand to put in between those different bricks on the arch to hold them together in that shape. And then I have a stick that's 16 inches tall, and I've put it on the floor of the oven in this heap of sand. We're going to make a really smooth heap of the sand, and the shape of the sand is going to be the inside of the oven, and that sand is just going to support the oven as it is built. And then once the oven is dry, we'll be able to scoop the sand out from the doorway and it will be ready. And this is Paul. Paul is helping to build the oven today, and he already knows how to build ovens. This is not his first one, so we're working on this one together. It's not done yet, but you can see how we're putting the sand right to the edge of the slab that's the floor of the oven, and then it's kind of going to go up and curve just to the point of this 16-inch stick. Once the sand was almost the height of that stick, we pulled it out and then finished making the smooth sand heap. And then we're putting this paper, which you could use newspaper, just to cover that sand, so that when we build the oven, we'll know where the oven begins and the sand begins. Because when it's all dry, we'll be scooping the sand out from the inside of the oven, and we don't want to scoop out the oven wall. And so once we touch the paper, we'll know that we're at the edge of the oven. Now we're just sprinkling some water on the paper to make it stay in place, and then we'll start building the first layer of the oven with the clay and sand mixture. This is the building mixture for the oven, and it's about 1 part clay soil to 2 parts sand, or 3 parts sand, depending on how much clay is in your clay soil. So mine is pretty close to 1 part termite soil and 2 parts sand. And you know it's ready when you can feel that it's sticky, and you can make a ball out of it, and then when you drop the ball, it still stays relatively in a ball shape. If it turned into like a total pancake, then you would know that it's too wet. So we're going to put this along the edge of the oven, about 3 inches wide, which is, depending on the size of your hand, 3 or 4 fingers. And we'll build it all the way over this paper and over the arch of the doorway. And that will be the first layer of the oven. We've now finished putting the main building mixture on the oven. So it's about 3 inches thick all the way around. We'll finish the arch with the plaster and the insulation, but just for now, this is the main building mixture. The next step is to put a layer of the insulation mixture, the one that's mostly wood shavings mixed with very thin watered down clay, and that one needs to be at least 4 inches thick. So you need to make sure that you know how much is 4 inches. Is it like the width of my hand? Or you can make a stick that size to make sure you're making it wide enough. You can make the insulation as thick as you want, but it should be at least 4 inches thick. Okay, the insulation layer on the oven is finished. So all the way around, the clay soil mixed with the wood shavings. And then the next step is to make the plastering layer. So you make the same mixture of clay, soil, and sand that you use for the building material of the first layer of the oven. And then you mix in dry grass or stalks of millet if you want, or you could even use cow manure just to finish off the top layer of the oven, make it smooth, and keep this sawdust mixture inside. Okay, for this plaster we're adding dry grass into the sand and clay mixture. So this one can be wetter than the one that we use to build the main part of the oven, because it's just going to be a thinner layer and it will be to smooth the outside and make it more solid. Here's the final product of the plaster. So you can see it's much softer than the other one, and if we make a ball and drop it, it will just splat into a pancake. So this one we're going to put as thin or thick of a layer as you want to cover the whole oven, and then I'll show you what that looks like. Here's the oven after it has been plastered. So we put the thin layer of plaster over the insulation layer that had the wood shavings in it, and then after that was done, just used wet hands with a tiny bit of clay just to smooth the outside so that it looks like this. You don't want to put a really thick layer of wet clay because then it will just crack as it dries. But don't worry if there are some cracks as it dries, it will still turn out well. And now we just need to leave the oven to dry for probably about a week or longer if it's really cool and cloudy where you are. Here it's hot and dry, so I think after a week it will be dry enough, and then I'll be able to take those bricks that are supporting the arch out and dig out the sand from the inside of the oven, and I'll show you that once we get to a week. One last thing, if I had done a better job, I would have left more space after putting the stones inside this base, and so then my cement slab would be level with the outside of this base. But you can see that I put so many stones in that once I put the bottles, everything was level, and then I had to put the cement slab on top of it. So that means that the door of my oven from here to here is 10 inches, but from here to here is more than 10 inches. So what I'm going to do after this is dry, I'll put some more cement in here just to level out this space, and then I'll have a nice smooth entrance to the oven, and I'll be able to slide my food right in there. So I'll show you how that looks when I get to that point, but for now we're just going to let it dry and then finish with the cement later. Alright, now that we have built our oven, let's do a quick review of the building process so that you have all of the steps in your mind. The first thing that you need to do is build your base with a 46-inch diameter. So you make that circle, build it, let it dry, then fill it with stones. Then once that one is ready, you start work on your oven. You'll need a cement slab that's 22.5 inches in diameter, and that's going to be the floor of your oven. But before you put that one down, you make some insulation material, which is wood shavings mixed with clay soil. And you mix that one together. If you have glass bottles, you put them down, put the insulation mixture around them, then you put your floor slab on top of that. Once you have that, you build the arch for the doorway, and the doorway should be 12 inches wide and 10 inches tall. Then, after you've done that, you build a mound of sand, a nice smooth shape that starts on the base of the oven and goes straight up so that it's 16 inches tall. So you make that one nice and smooth. Once it's done, you take a piece of newspaper or flip chart paper and put it on top of the sand, get it a little bit wet so it sticks and makes that shape. And that's going to show you the barrier between the sand, which will come out, and then the first layer of the oven. The first layer of the oven is a mixture of clay soil and sand, and it's about 1 part clay soil to 2 parts sand, or 3 parts sand if your soil has a lot of clay or it's just straight up clay. You mix that one together with your feet or with a shovel until it's nice and mixed, and it can form a ball that when you drop it, it doesn't flatten like a pancake, but it still holds its shape to some extent. You build that over the cement, or over the sand heap. It should be about 3 inches wide, and so depending on the size of your hand, that could be 3, 4 fingers, but you can see what size that is. For me, it's my 4 fingers. So as you put the clay soil down, you press it from the top and then smooth it from the side. you don't want to push it against the sand because it might distort the shape of your oven. So you put it down, you keep making layers, and you go all the way over your 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 sand heap. Once that layer is done, you may need to make a lot of the insulation mixture. So again, that's a mixture of clay soil with a lot of water and wood shavings. And you make it so that you can just stick those wood shavings together into a ball. It doesn't need to stick as much as the clay and sand mixture because it's going to be covered up by the plaster at the end. So your insulation needs to be at least 4 inches thick. It can be thicker if you want. You build it the same way as you did with the first layer. Pack it down with this hand and then smooth it with the other hand. So you go all the way over your main building material. Once that one is done, the last layer is your plastering mixture, and this one is the same as the building one, sand plus clay soil, but you make it wetter and you mix in dry grass or some sort of fiber that will help it to hold its shape. So I used that one. You don't need to put a real thick layer, it just needs to be enough to hold everything in place, and then you can smooth it with wet hands or with just a little bit of really runny clay soil, and then you should end up with an oven looking like this. Let it dry for about a week. It's better to let it dry for longer than shorter. Then once you're sure that it's dry, you're going to scoop out the sand, and that's the next step that we're going to do after a week. So I'll see you then. Again, if you need to look at the measurements, here is the document that will help you make sure that you have the correct measurements for making the floor of the oven, the base, and then the door, and the height of the sand. Welcome back. For you it has been only moments, but for me it has been a full week of very hot and dry weather. And so today I'm going to be removing the sand and the bricks that are supporting the oven, and I'll just be scooping all of them out into this wheelbarrow so that I can keep the sand and use it for something else. And I'll show you how it looks once I start getting the sand out and reach that paper that helps me to know the boundary between the sand and the oven. You'll remember we used a lot of sand to be able to make this sand heap, so there's going to be a lot coming out of here. You might want to have some sort of stick or small trowel to help you scoop the sand out as it gets farther and farther back, but you want to be careful not to stab or push too hard because the inside layer of the oven is not fully dry yet, and if you poke, then you can stab the inside of the oven, or you can scrape that part out instead of just taking out the sand. And I've reached the place where the paper is, and the paper is there to help me find the beginning of the oven, so I'll try to show you what that looks like from inside. Okay, you can see that white paper inside. That's the beginning of the oven and the end of the sand. So now I'm going to have to be a little bit careful to make sure that I don't scrape too far into that. You can see some places where I kind of poked the paper a little bit with my fingers because the inside there is still soft, but I'll keep on working on the sand and be careful so that I'm able to pull it all out without damaging the inside of the oven. Alright, I believe I've managed to get out most of the sand from inside the oven. You can see that it's quite a big pile there. Had to stick half my body inside the oven to be able to reach the back part. But let me show you. You can see the paper there in the back that shows us that I reached the edge of the oven. I'm going to give it some more time to dry so that any little bits of sand that are still sticking to the inside there will fall off, and I'll be able to peel that paper off also as it gets dry. Then the last thing, I'm going to put some plaster here on the inside part of the arch of the bricks to make it smooth like the outside and nice, not have these big cracks and holes in there. So that will be the next step. And then once I feel like it's fully dried from inside, I'll build a fire inside the oven to dry it and bake the brick, or the clay sand mixture, basically like making bricks, and that will harden it so that it's finished and can be used for cooking. After I removed the sand from the oven, I plastered the inside of this archway, the inside part of the bricks, to finish it nicely. Put some cement to level the doorway so that that slab inside is level with the outside. If you are more careful than I am, you can have your slab be level with the stand underneath the oven so that you don't have to do that, but I had to do that. I gave it a full week of drying in the sun after removing the sand, and now I've put a shade over it to protect it from rain. So we've reached the point where the very last step on the oven is drying it with a fire inside, as I mentioned before. So after I do that, I'll be ready to be able to bake in it. After putting the fire the first time, it's not hot enough to be able to bake because most of the heat is used to dry the water that's inside the oven and bake the brick. But if you really wanted to bake something that takes a really low temperature, you might be able to do that. But once you've dried it with the fire, then you can start using it for cooking, and you can see my other video on how to use a clay oven to learn more about that. So I hope that this has been helpful in allowing you to make your very own clay oven with locally available materials.